Chapter Spooks.
G'day, and welcome back to Chapter Spooks, where we talk about the stories that keep your kids up at night. Today, in our second episode, we'll be talking about the second book in the Bone Chiller series, called Little Pet Shop of Horrors. Obviously, this is a riff on Little Shop of Horrors, which apparently was a little black and white film back in the day, with an incredibly small budget, like micro budget. But, of course, most people know it as the musical, and the movie based on that musical starring Rick Moranis, with Audrey 2 and the plant that apparently is from outer space. I thought it was a very common title to be used, and in fact I was looking through the books I've got here. Obviously Goosebumps has two. It has the Little Comic Shop of Horrors in the Give Yourself Goosebumps series, and Little Shop of Hamsters in the new Horrorland series. But in my Chapter Spooks books I've got on my shelf, Dead Time Stories has Little Magic Shop of Horrors, and Graveyard School has Little School of Horrors. It's pretty common for Chapter Spooks books to have titles that either reference or are a riff on old B-movies, like, the Thing from Planet X, or the Such and Such of Doom, but because they're kids' books, they'll throw in something that relates to kids, like, so it's the Substitute Teacher from Planet X, or it's like the Little Sister of Doom, something like that. So it's a cute little thing. I quite like it. I might get into some of these tropes later on as we go, but as for this, it actually also has another trope that it's playing with, not so much with the title, but also has kid turns into thing plot. And don't worry, that may sound incredibly broad, and so you can make a lot of plots out of different things kids turn into. But of course, the most common things that kids turn into is animals, because that is a huge plethora of options that you can go from. Like, heck, if you turn them into a fish, that changes very much from if you turn them into a bird, that kind of a thing. And this has them turning into animals that are, in particular, pets. Or dogs. Like, that's actually the most common of these of all time. It is kid turns into a dog. I guarantee you'll see it in a bunch more of these stories as we go along. And it's not a bad premise, there's a lot you can mine from it, but as I hinted at the end of last episode, spoiler alert, I kinda hate this story. I hate it so much. And as to why, well, I think the easiest way to explain is just to get right into it. So, let's get into the summary of Bone Chillers number 2, Little Pet Shop of Horrors. In this story, we're following Cassidy Kavanaugh, known as Cassie to her friends. And in chapter 1, she's hanging out with her friend Suki Chen as they've noticed a new pet shop in town called Custom Pets. Just a quick side note, I think Suki Chen is a bit on the nose as an obviously non-European name, but at the same time, I really appreciate that because a lot of these Chapter Spooks books seem to struggle when it comes to diversity. So honestly, if it takes having a name that clearly is not a white person just to make sure that you get a little diversity in your books, I'm willing to accept that. Although, from what little research I did, apparently Suki tends to be a Japanese name, whereas Chen tends to be a Chinese surname. So either Suki Chen is a biracial queen, or Betsy Haynes didn't do her research. You decide. So they head into this pet store, and we meet Mr. Willard, who runs the store. He's overweight, he has dark black eyes, and he's really creepy. In fact, the girls are looking around and then Cassidy starts sneezing because it turns out that she's allergic to dogs or pets. But as they leave, he calls after them laughing and says, "You'll be back!" So I don't think he could be more cliched villain if you tried. Suki wants to go home so she can practice some gymnastics because that's her main character trait besides being Asian. But before they can even cross the street, they notice David Ferrante, a kid from school, who has a box in his hands with holes in it, clearly has some kind of pet inside, and there's 3 boys around him, Max Neal, Todd Cook, and Ken Coffey, who are begging to see what's inside. For some reason, Cassie decides she needs to see what's inside this box, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me because it's clear that they are not friends with David. David calls her Hop-Along Cassidy, and he calls Suki Pukey. He's clearly a bully to these girls. They don't like him, he doesn't like them. So I don't know why she insists on seeing it. She actually says in the book, "Oh, I don't like people keeping secrets from me," but I don't understand why she insists on looking in the box, because it actually leads up to a chapter scare, because she goes up, he opens the box, and of course inside is a tarantula. Cassidy is terrified. Like, she is screaming, she's trying to back away, but she can't. Her friend Suki is just as scared, but apparently she gets away by, as it says here, and I quote, turning a backflip, and and another until she was several feet away. The girl backflipped away, and then this... honestly, this whole scene is insane. I'm going to have to quote it from the book just to give it justice. Cassie shrank back against the tree as David opened the box again. He took the spider between 2 fingers and held it over his head so everyone could see. Its legs wiggled and battered the empty air. "I'm naming him Igor," David said, grinning slyly. He put the tarantula on his shoulder and lurched forward, limping and dragging 1 foot across the grass in a perfect, hunchbacked imitation. "Don't do it," said Cassie as he inched closer to her. He had one hand raised like a claw. His face was twisted into a hideous grin. Behind him, the other boys giggled and slapped each other's backs. "David Ferrante, you'd better not," squealed Cassie. Before she could move, David shouted, "And I got Igor to scare the daylights out of girls. Like this!" He reached up and plucked the spider off his shoulder. With a sweeping motion, he pitched it at Cassie. She heard herself shrieking at the top of her lungs as the hairy monster landed on her arm. "Get it off! Get it off!" she cried, shaking her arm and flinging the tarantula onto the ground. "Come on," shouted Suki, grabbing Cassie's arm and pulling her away from the tree. "Let's get away from these idiots." Cassie stumbled after Suki. As she hurried towards her bike, she glanced back over her shoulder. The boys were laughing. "Hop along, Cassidy is a chicken," yelled one. "Suki Pukey is gonna puke," shouted another. Jumping on their bikes, the girls rode away as fast as they could. He threw a spider he threw a living thing at another person. Who does that? Who goes to a pet store, buys an animal specifically just to harass girls with it, and then throws it? This is completely nuts. So you better believe that we're going to come back to this, but I need to get back to the summary, all right? So after that insanity, we then go to Suki's house. So Suki's there, she's practicing gymnastics, doing her tumbles and some practice. And Cassidy's basically moping about the fact that she can't get a dog because of her horrendous allergies. And Suki, just as matter-of-factly, well, why don't you just get one of them short-hair breeds, so you'll be less allergic. And Cassidy is so excited by this that in the next scene, she goes back to Custom Pets and she asks Mr. Willard about short-hair breeds. And he effectively says, yeah, they've got them available. So she heads home excited to tell her parents that she can finally get a dog. Quick fact check though, it's not actually true that having long or short hair is good if you have an allergy to pets. See, what causes allergies tends to be the dander on the animal, and that comes off no matter what kind of hair you have, but if a dog has an undercoat, sometimes it can catch the dander. But my point is, it's not long or short hair. In fact, one of the best dogs that are hypoallergenic for people who struggle with that are poodles. They have incredibly long, fluffy hair. Some of them look like pom-poms, but because they don't have that undercoat, you're less likely to get that dander. So it's not the biggest issue in the world, but it always bugs me when a book meant for kids doesn't teach them properly. So Cassidy goes to her parents and asks if she can get one of these dogs. And both of them say, absolutely not. They put their foot down saying, no, your health is more important. Which is an odd stance to take considering she just explained that it won't affect her health. But either way, she is not getting a dog whatsoever. That's what her parents have decided. And now, out of pure desperation at this point, Cassidy goes back to Custom Pets for a third time because even she doesn't really believe it, but she's kind of hoping that by asking the question about these short-haired dogs, maybe Mr. Willard ordered a couple, and maybe she'll have to force her parents to buy them. I mean, it has to go to a good home, right? But despite being the obvious villain, even Mr. Willard has to follow procedure. He can't just buy a pet unless he has a parent's signature and a down payment. So Cassidy's upset, and she's getting ready to leave the store when she hears screaming, crying. It's an animal cry, like a cat, and she can't see where it's coming from. It's not the cages. It seems to be coming from the back room, but Mr. Willard isn't even reacting to it. So she heads towards the back room door to see if she can find this poor animal crying out in what seems to be pain. But just as she gets to the door, she goes to grab the handle, and Mr. Willard says, "You're not allowed back there, that's staff only." Cassidy, totally caught in the act, decides to make up some lie, says she was looking for the bathroom. But then, this is a little odd to me, but Mr. Willard then says, oh, well, the bathroom's not there. It's there, and he points to a bathroom in the store. Which, the reason it's weird to me is because this is described as a very small store. There's less than like half a dozen cages. Most don't even have animals. I don't understand how a building that small has a public restroom, but Either way, even if it's a little contrived, she decides to go to the bathroom, pretends to go, as in after a few minutes, she washes her hands, and she's finally about to leave. But as she goes to the door and heads into the store, she hides behind one of the shelves because she can hear David, that kid who threw a spider at her before. And this next, I have to read this from the book, just so you know I'm not making this up, right? Leaving the restroom, she walked quickly toward the exit, but she suddenly heard a familiar voice and stopped. It was David Ferrante. She ducked behind a display of dog food to listen. "I accidentally sat on my tarantula," David said, "so I want a new pet." Cassie clamped a hand over her mouth to keep from bursting out laughing. The thought of David sitting on his revolting spider and squashing it to death was too funny. She buried her face in her hands to muffle the sound of her giggles, but the more Cassie tried to stifle her laughter, the funnier it got. Then she heard a woman talking. Peering around the dog food, Cassie saw David kneeling in front of the Basset Hound's cage. His parents were at the counter with Mr. Willard. She couldn't hear all of what they were saying, just a few words. Dog, golden retriever, pet. And it looked as if Mrs. Ferrante was filling out a form. The next thing Cassie knew, David and his parents left the store. Cassie hesitated a moment to give the Ferrantes time to get in their car and drive away. She didn't want David to know that she had been listening when he confessed to squashing his spider. Even though I hate spiders, I'm arachnophobic, I can't stand it, but even though I hate spiders, the idea of laughing at the tragedy of someone accidentally killing their own pet, even though it is a spider, is absolutely disgusting to me. But again, we'll talk about it all at the end. So, after hearing the story and the people leave, for some reason, and again, before she can even leave, Cassidy starts feeling woozy and lightheaded as she comes out. And Mr. Willard helps her by offering her a drink. It's actually a strange pink liquid, but Cassidy is just out of it, so she takes the drink and swallows it. It tastes weirdly sweet, and then she loses consciousness, blacks out completely. When she wakes back up, she is stuck in a cage. She starts trying to call out for help, but all of her words turn into barking, and it becomes clear very quickly that she's turned into a dog. She's got paws, she's got a long nose, she's covered in fur. In fact, she is a golden retriever, the exact same type that the Ferrante family ordered. She's yelling and screaming for help, which of course all turns into barking, and so Mr. Willard comes in and basically says, "If you don't stop barking, I'm going to beat you within an inch of your life." So she quietens down and she tries to get some sleep until the next day she wakes up and in come the Ferrante family to come get their pet. So they put her on a leash, take her in the car. She's trying to say, "Oh, come on, someone help me. I'm not a dog, I'm a girl." And of course they all hear barking, and so Mr. Willard's like, "Well, you're going to have to teach that dog to not barking. You shouldn't put up with that. You should punish that dog." But they put her in the car and take her home. And what follows is actually a very repetitive series of events, because effectively what keeps happening is that Cassidy hates being a dog, and so she's constantly saying, "Look, I'm not a dog, I'm a girl." But every time she does anything like that, as far as the family's concerned, all she's doing is acting like a bad dog. So she gets in even more trouble. It means that she feels even more indignified and she hates it even more. And as much as I get that there is some horror in there, it's honestly so frustrating, because after the 4th time, what about after the 6th time, it boggles my mind that she doesn't sit down and realize, hey, maybe the reason all of this terrible stuff keeps happening is because I keep acting like a bad dog. So in the car, David tries to play with her, but she doesn't want to because she's a girl, but they just think she's acting like a bad dog, so they rouse on her. Then when they get to the Ferrante household, they try to get her to eat some dog food, but of course she doesn't want to eat off the floor in a bowl because she's a girl, but she gets in trouble because she's acting like a bad dog. She then wants to go sit on the couch because she doesn't like sitting on the hard floor, but she gets in trouble because they think she's just acting like a bad dog. David decides then to take her for a walk, so he takes her for a walk down to the park, and he wants to go play fetch, so he gets a stick and he throws it. But she doesn't want to play fetch because she's a girl, but he just thinks she's acting like a bad dog, so he rouses on her. If this is getting repetitive for you, I need you to understand that this is what a lot of the rest of the book is. However, when she is at the park, she does encounter another dog that she recognizes, a Rottweiler. It's actually Barracuda, the dog she met before in the pet store. And so she goes up to him and says, "Well, I recognize you from the store. Are you are you like me? Have you been turned into a pet? But unfortunately, Barracuda doesn't say anything, doesn't even bark, doesn't make a single sound, which is so frustrating because I was actually wondering, like, maybe if she doesn't understand dog language, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but maybe she could understand what other dogs that were kids are saying, maybe. But this theory is never confirmed or denied because the dogs get separated because, of course, she's acting like a girl trying to get help and he just thinks she's being a bad dog, so he yanks her chain and takes her home. But there's also a quick scene where some of the other kids from school come and see her, like that trio of boys, Max Neal, Todd Cook, and Ken Coffey. She tries to get them to recognize her, especially when Suki Chen rides past on her bike, and even though the boys are insulting her, Suki Pukey, she runs up to try to get her friend's attention. Surely her friend can recognize her. But of course, her friend just thinks she's being a bad dog. In fact, she's worried that she's running up to go and attack her, to go bite her. And so Suki rides off. And so, of course, once again, Cassidy is left being treated like a bad dog. And then, I don't know if this is because she's been such a bad dog, but Mr. Ferrante then says, hey, a dog should be a dog. And he insists, hey, because she's a golden retriever, well, golden retrievers are meant to be good hunting dogs because they're meant to retrieve your kills. So he insists on taking him and David and Cassidy out to some farm somewhere with guns so they can go shoot birds and get her to go fetch them. And for what I think is the 8th time now, she refuses to go and pick up the birds in her mouth because dead birds in your mouth, it's disgusting, because she's a girl, not a dog, once again. But because Mr. Ferrante has a gun, she feels threatened, and so she forces herself to go into the cold pond and put this dead bird in her mouth and walk back and drop it on the ground as soon as she gets out of the pond. And they're rousing on her because she put it like 20 feet away from them, because as soon as she got out of the pond she was like, ugh, gross. But then for the rest of the day she refuses to go pick them up because that is the grossest thing she's ever done in her life, understandably. But of course, every time she refuses to retrieve a bird, Mr. Ferrante is just getting angrier and angrier because she's being a bad dog, until when they finally go home, he's so mad he makes her sleep in the basement. There's also an interesting scene in the next chapter where they're watching the news and she sees that she is a missing person. Her parents are looking for her, they don't know what's happened. But inevitably, what happens is that she starts barking, trying to get the people's attention, so they watch the news. They just think she's being a bad dog, and so she gets in even more trouble again. So Cassie's starting finally to realize, hey, obviously I'm not getting their attention by doing the same thing over and over again. And I'm thinking, finally, what is she going to do? So she decides, okay, I have a plan to finally get their attention, so maybe they'll listen to me. And I'm going to read this next bit verbatim, so once again, I am not making a single word of this up. Cassie lay awake all night at the foot of David's bed. She had to find some way to make him pay attention to her, to understand. Barking certainly wouldn't do it. She had found that out the hard way. There must be something else I can do to get his attention, she thought. But what? It was almost morning when an idea came to her. She would get his attention, all right. She was so angry and so frustrated that it didn't matter what happened. She would get it good. She waited until the house was empty. David was playing at a friend's house. His father had gone to work and his mother was grocery shopping. The timing was perfect. Cassie started in David's closet. She dug through the mounds of dirty clothes, the empty potato chip bags, the catcher's mitt and soccer ball until she found what she was looking for. David's prize basketball sneakers. She dragged one of them out into the middle of his bedroom floor and growled at it as if it were her biggest enemy. Just wait until he sees this, she thought, her eyes gleaming and her fangs bared. Cassie lunged at the shoe, grabbing it in her teeth and snarling. She shook it and wrestled it around the floor. Next instant, she dropped it. Ugh, P.U., she cried. It stinks! She sat back on her haunches and looked at the sneaker. She didn't know if she could bring herself to do what needed to be done. It was just too smelly. Holding her breath, Cassie grabbed the shoe again. Her sharp teeth punctured the soft leather. Next, she held it tightly with her front paws, tearing and tearing at the tongue until it was in shreds. This is starting to be fun, she thought gleefully. Now for the serious part. She plunged her nose into the shoe, jerking out the inner lining and spitting it out an instant later. Wow, it tasted 10 times worse than it smelled. As soon as she had finished destroying the sneaker, Cassie barreled into the table beside David's bed, sending his model airplane collection all over the floor. Then she rolled on every one of them, smashing them into a million slivers of wood. Next, she pulled the covers off his bed, ripping open his pillow and watching as a cloud of white feathers burst into the air and settled over everything like a gentle snowfall. There! If that doesn't get his attention, nothing will, she thought, surveying the destruction with satisfaction. Now maybe he'll try to understand me. I struggle to express how stupid this is. We'll discuss it more at the end, but honestly, as I keep saying, the reason she keeps getting in trouble is because she keeps acting like a bad dog, and her brilliant plan is to act like a stereotypical bad dog. So what comes as a surprise to nobody except apparently Cassidy, she then gets sent to obedience school. So her leather leash gets replaced with a choke chain, and she gets taken to an obedience school. But I was a little interested to see how this would work, because after all, an obedience school is full of so many dogs. Maybe now we get to see whether or not she can talk to other dogs. And sure enough, that Barracuda Rottweiler dog is there again, so she tries to talk to him, but the person running the obedience school, who is called Bruiser, and is a weirdly muscly guy who looks incredibly mean, says, Rule 1, no barking. And since every time she talks, it sounds like barking, when she goes and tries to talk to Barracuda, she gets in trouble, and so they have to pull on her chain. But this girl just will not learn, because just moments later, she tries talking to him again, and then they pull on her chain again. She's not even listening to the command she's being given to, I think it's just to sit or something. And then, and I'm not making this up, the instructor then comes over and grabs the chain and pulls it so hard that she starts losing consciousness. She can't breathe. She is freaking out. And so, out of desperation, she bites the instructor, and then he hits her on the head and she loses consciousness. But even worse for her, when she gets home, because of all that's happened, she finally comes groggily into consciousness. Because again, she was hit in the head so hard, she must have like a concussion or something. But she's been expelled from the school because she bit the teacher, right? So now Mr. and Mrs. Ferrante are like, you know what? I think we just need to get rid of this dog. She's a bad dog. She is making so much trouble. But David is, no, you can't get rid of my dog. I love my dog. You can understand why, even if she's a bad dog, he still loves her. And it's almost kind of a sweet scene as Cassidy thinks, maybe David isn't such a bad person if he's so kind to his dogs, even when they're bad dogs, So they say, okay, we'll think about it tonight and we'll make a decision in the morning. But so that afternoon, she then goes out in the yard with David. He's there making another one of his model planes. And as she's there, she sees a puddle on the ground and she gets an idea, one of the first somewhat good ideas she's ever had. She uses her paw to write in the mud, "Help, not dog, girl." Like I said, not the worst idea, definitely not the worst idea she's had all book. So she tries to get their attention, but as soon as they see the dog, they just think, oh my goodness, you are covered in mud. You're not coming in the house. So she just then has to sleep outside that night. So she's basically given up. She spends the entire night thinking, oh no, I'm just going to be a dog forever. I'm ruined. And so then she sleeps out on the lawn. But the next morning when she wakes up, she actually gets an idea, because she's looking at the garden bed and she realizes how soft the dirt is by the fence. And she thinks, hey, maybe I can just escape. So she starts digging. She starts digging as much as she can into the garden bed to try to get a hole so that she can get under the fence. And she starts to see a gap under the fence as she's digging and digging. But of course, before she can even get her nose into the hole, Mr. Ferrante is furious that she's been digging up his garden beds. And so it's over. Then and there, he says, no, I am done with this dog. We're taking it back to the pet shop. So she gets taken back to Custom Pets. She gets given to Mr. Willard, who basically takes her in the back room saying, it's all right, I'll deal with it. And he takes her in the back room, talking to her saying, well, I guess you couldn't be a good dog, could you? Well, there's only one thing for it then. We're going to have to put you to sleep. Not going to lie, genuinely a terrifying prospect for someone who's been turned into a dog. So he gets a needle, which he fills with some clear liquid, which is obviously a poison. He gets ready to inject her, and of course she freaks out, she kicks up a fuss, she makes him stumble and drop the syringe. Basically, she manages to stop him. Even when he tries to get a second syringe, he runs out of breath, because he's so evil and fat, basically. So he says, I'm going to get some help. So you wait just there. It's all going to be over soon enough. So knowing her days are numbered, Cassidy then decides that she needs to find some way out. And she finds a window up the top, which she has to climb on the table and then climb up to try to get to this window that's like locked shut. But when she tries, she stumbles and the table actually collapses under her and she falls off, and even a vial of liquid breaks next to her. So she thinks all hope is lost. She doesn't understand how she could possibly get out of this. And for reasons that aren't adequately explained as far as I'm concerned, she then decides to drink the liquid that's on the ground with the broken glass. It even says that she doesn't care if she's drinking up slivers of glass. She just laps up the liquid. And then she falls unconscious suddenly. When she wakes up, it's revealed pretty obviously that she drank the same pink liquid. It was the same pink sweet liquid that turned her into a dog, which has now turned her back into a human. But of course she's naked. We'll put a pin in that for now, but she manages to find her clothes in a cardboard box, and then she runs back to that window, which she can now reach because she's back in human form, and she jumps and climbs out just in time. She hears Mr. Willard coming back into the room. So now she's free, and as she's going home, she sees a cat in a tree, and she can't help it. She goes up to the cat and leans closer, sort of rubbing its ears and looking into its sad eyes, thinking, are you a cat, or were you a kid once, just like I was? Then in the final chapter, she goes home, and it says that she made up some story that she had amnesia, like she was in some sort of a fugue state. But her parents are just overjoyed that she's home. They're so happy. So she goes home, and she goes to her bedroom, and she rests. And then the next day, she wakes up, and after trying to call her friend Suki, she can't get her on the phone, but her parents come into her bedroom, and they say, look, after all this, and we've been thinking about it, and when we said that you couldn't get a dog, we thought we were being way too harsh. So we decided to get you a dog. And they bought her a Pekingese puppy. And she's so overjoyed when she sees the puppy. It's so full of energy. It's running around her room. And then she sees the dog do a backflip. And she thinks, no. Suki? The end. Alright, let's discuss. Now, we're going to start with the positives. Or I should say the positive, because as far as I can see, there's only really one. And really it is that this has a pretty okay idea. Not executed great, but the idea of a story that is horror story, because it's about taking the perspective of a pet who belongs to a bad owner. That is a great way to not only have a lot of horrifying concepts, but also to teach kids about pet ownership and what an animal goes through, and empathizing with the animal that is suffering because they're with a bad owner. Not inherently a bad idea, could be interesting. I don't know if it's great for the audience, because especially if you want to get into some of the things that abused pets go through, that might be a little dark, but hey, not a bad idea. Not a bad idea in and of itself, could be done very well. Of course, the negative is that it was not done very well at all. What this book seems to do more than anything else is normalize abuse. From the very first pet we see that someone owns, David is throwing a pet spider at someone because he thinks it's funny. Now, I need to point out that as we learn in a later chapter, even though he is completely evil, Mr. Willard will not sell a pet unless he has the parents' permission if you're under 18. David is under 18, which means that his parents heard him say, I would like the worst, scariest, most disgusting spider you have because I want to scare girls with it. And they said, sure, how much? Not to mention, the whole thing with dog ownership, they keep saying you need to be a responsible pet owner. And yet, even these parents don't seem to realize that in order for a dog to do something, you need to train it, you need to teach it. Let alone the whole not being on the couch thing, not barking all the time thing. But then the father out of nowhere decides, hey, we're going to go hunting animals. You have to teach a dog to do that. You realize that, right? I recognize that some of that is instinct, that they do like fetching stuff. But the thing is that usually when a dog is fetching a dead animal, it's because they want to eat it. You have to train them to get the animal, put it at your feet, and then you give them a treat, and then you can eat together. That's the whole thing. Training a dog is not some weird magical thing that just seems to happen when you yell at it loud enough. But this book is incapable of remarking upon that because our girl can understand what they're saying. Cassidy can understand everything they're saying. So that's what boggles me so much, that she keeps doing the wrong thing. She can literally hear them and understand them when they say the words sit, and then she doesn't. And then she's surprised that she gets in trouble. And I'm not saying that if you're in any undignified situation, if you're in, and this is definitely an abusive relationship towards her because they are such bad pet owners. So if you're in an abusive relationship, I can understand that it is not her fault that she's in the situation, but she isn't helping herself in any way, shape, or form. She definitely is making it worse for herself when she is constantly doing the wrong thing, knowing that she will get in trouble for doing so. I'm not blaming her for being a victim, I'm blaming her for being so ignorant of her own situation. Speaking of which, we definitely need to discuss Cassidy Kavanaugh as a character. So, to every writer out there, I think you need to understand there's actually a trope. It's called kick the dog or even shoot the dog. The idea of this trope is it's how you get an audience to hate someone instantly. No effort required, just make a character hurt something that doesn't deserve it and can't fight back. And intentional or no, that's what Betsy Haynes did when she made her laugh at this kid for killing his pet spider. But if you want to make it even worse, right, I'm gonna tell you a little trick when it comes to writing. So when it comes to characters, you might hear a lot of people say, oh, well, this character needs to be likable. Not true at all. A character doesn't need to be likable. There are a lot of hateable characters who people love, a lot of villains that people even like and sometimes root for. You know, that's why we have anti-hero stories. But the way to have an audience appreciate a character and even like them is to make them understandable. Even if someone is doing the most horrendous stuff possible, like murder, rape, genocide, if you can have them understand the reason why they're doing it, even if they hate the character, they can still follow along. They can still empathize with them, because that's what empathy is about. It's about being able to feel with a character. And in this instance, it's about being able to think with a character. And so alongside her callous disregard for someone else's loss, even though they are a bad pet owner, the reason why I hate this character so much is because I cannot understand why she thinks the way she does. Why she is constantly not even understanding her situation, even though I understood it. As soon as I realized that she was in a cage, I'm like, oh, she's a dog. Okay, well, that's going to be very difficult. And there is so much potential here. Like, the only scene that I think is very well done is specifically the scene after the duck gets shot and she's told to retrieve it. She feels like she's compelled to retrieve it because, like I said, they have the guns. And then, even though she knows she has to, she gets into the water, it's cold, and then she has this animal in her mouth which is wet and it's still warm because it was alive just seconds ago. She could taste it on her tongue, and as soon as she gets out of the water, she drops it in the mouth because she is gagging. She is about to throw up. It is disgusting. That is a perfect encapsulation of why a person would be a bad dog. We can all understand that, right? That most people would make bad dogs. I think that's a fair statement to make. But you know what I think would make this book so much better? So what if the majority of this book was actually her doing a good job at trying to convince them that she's a real girl? Right? So, like the mud drawing thing, like I said, that's one of the best ideas she has, and she has it 2 seconds before she gets taken back and nearly killed. So, off the top of my head, right, a couple of things that she could do, like, okay, she can't talk, but she clearly has the capacity to write. So what if she managed to get a pen or a pencil and she wanted to write that hey, I'm a girl, I'm not a dog, right? But a dog doesn't have easy access to paper, so either she'd have to make a mess of someone's desk in order to do it, and then how would you like hold it properly? The point I'm making is that either she'd have to write on the wall or she'd have to make some scroll on paper, and it's very easy to break those pens, especially if you don't know how to use your mouth like a hand. So it makes sense to me that she would make an awful mess, and then they'd be like, oh, well, you're being a bad dog. But at least you would then understand. You're like, oh, well, she's trying to do everything she can to escape, right? She's trying to do everything she can to fix this situation. That's more understandable. Or hey, what about, right, okay, Suki Chen gets this in a split second. Her main thing is that she's a gymnast, so she does a backflip, all right? Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that she's good at. What about something that a person's good at, right? So what if she decides to like tap with her feet? Like, that's something she could try to do to get attention, right? But you can understand that if you're trying to get someone's attention by like tapping them on the shoulder, and you're a dog, that might be incredibly annoying because you don't realize they're trying to talk to you. You just think that they're putting their paws on you and being annoying. So that's another example. Then she can get in trouble, but at least you'd understand, hey, she's trying to escape the situation. You see what I'm saying here? I'm just doing these off the top of my head. But why couldn't the whole book have been stuff like that? Her trying to escape like that? And then the other question is, why couldn't this book have picked something to focus on? Because it seems to me that the biggest flaw in this book is that it thought, hey, what if a girl turned into a dog? And it's like, okay, well, that could be horrifying, but then it never really explores why. To me, one scene that I got in my head as soon as I thought of the idea of someone turning into a dog is, do you know how dogs drink water? Seriously, do you know how dogs drink water? It's only been realized for the past decade or so. People used to think that they use their tongue as a spoon, but what they do is they punch the water with their tongue, basically. They hit it really hard with their tongue, and it creates a column of water that splashes up, which they then have to snap in their jaws in order to drink it, right? Most people don't know that, and I can understand that a young girl may not know that. So if you put a bowl in front of a dog, and they don't have the ability to purse their lips to sip, she would basically have to just about drown herself the first time she tries to drink water. That's a scary scene, and that would be something how people would look at her and say, there's something wrong with that dog. And they might just think that she's a bad dog, or maybe that she's got something wrong with her head, you know. But that's a good idea of a scene. Okay, I think it's a good idea. Argue amongst yourselves if you think that's a terrible idea. But this is like the first thing that comes to mind of the practicalities of becoming a dog when you don't have a dog's brain. You don't understand how they work. Like, here's another one. This is just because I know some things about dog physiology. Dogs don't have a butt, right? I mean, they have an anus, but they don't have like the gluteus maximus that humans have. Do you realize that dogs don't sit on their butt usually? Usually they sit on their feet because their feet are padded. It's a fascinating little thing that you may not realize if you were a human who just became a dog. So you'd have to learn to sit on your feet as opposed to sitting on your butt because it hurts. There's a bone right there against skin. Like, these are just some of the examples of how if you actually put the effort in to empathize with what it's like to be something that you're not, then you can not only force you to look from a different perspective, but also to have some of the horrors in there come out naturally without even putting in all this effort to make up some contrivance about going bird hunting or making up some nonsense about how she decides to dig up the garden at the last second or act like a bad dog by eating sneakers. I don't even want to dwell on that because that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Hey, this will make him understand me. I'll act like a bad dog. And the last thing I wanted to bring up, right, like I said, we'll put a pin in the fact that when she turns back into a human, she's naked. Right? Now, I think that Animorphs did a good thing when they decided on the idea of morphing suits. They decided that if something's really close to your skin, then it can morph with you. So regular clothes wouldn't, so they decided to wear like some skin-tight like swimsuits and like sports clothes, basically, so that when they transform, they're not naked. I think I prefer that to the idea of some random girl being naked in a pet store somewhere. But the point, the reason why I'm bringing this up is not only to bring up how weird that is, but also Mr. Willard, right, the bad guy in this story. What exactly is his plan? Like, think about it. Why is he getting all of these kids? And he actually has so many, right? He's got a box full of their clothes. When she gets dressed, she has to dig through several clothes in the cardboard box in order to get at it. So he knows he is doing this to so many kids, and he must also know that they make terrible pets, right? I mean, is she really that much of an outlier that every other person who turns into a pet just is a really good pet? Do I have to bring up the question of, was that tarantula actually someone's kid? Which makes it even more horrifying that she was laughing at it. And hey, that Rottweiler that keeps popping up, right? So it's named Barracuda. Was he actually a kid or not? I'm assuming not, because the whole book, Cassidy is called Cassidy, even when she's a dog. And David just remarks on it like, hey, I know a girl named Cassidy. And that's kind of the end of that whole conversation. So I'm doubting there's actually a kid called Barracuda, unless he renames some of them and not all of them. You see, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Honestly, his whole motivation doesn't make any sense. Because think about it, right? What Mr. Willard has in his possession is a pink, imbibable liquid, slightly sweet tasting, so it doesn't taste bad, which upon drinking turns you into the exact animal that someone else ordered. So you decide what they become, or at least that's what I'm assuming, because the parents made it pretty specific what they wanted. There's a hint later on that it has the same colored fur as Cassidy's hair, so maybe the reason why it takes him so long to order some pets is because he has to find the right kid to turn into the right animal. But more important than any of this is that when you then drink that same liquid, you turn back into a human. Mr. Willard somehow has this strange chemical, and his first thought is, I'm going to kidnap children and sell them as bad acting pets to people who ask for it. Why you do this? Right? If his motivation is money, my first thought is sell this to the military so that they can have the best spy in the world. Just some animal. Just what is it? It can understand everything that humans are saying around it. Just make a spy, turn them into a dog, let them wander around the streets of wherever the heck they're warring at that time. Doesn't matter, because the military has so much money, they have a bottomless pit of blank checks which they would give to someone with that kind of technology, and you're using it to make shitty pets. And yes, there's willing suspension of disbelief. I'd be willing to go along with it if there was some good reason. Like, maybe he's a serial killer and he just likes the idea of killing children whilst they're pets and making the parents go along with it. Like, there might be some sort of sick thing going on there. Or maybe he is an animal. I mean, they keep hinting that he has weird black eyes and he never blinks, like he's some kind of a bug. Or maybe a toad because he's so fat and weird. Like, they say he has no lips. And my point is, if he was some animal and he wanted to torture kids by making them turn into pets that he's been and see how they suffer, like, that would be fine. Like, my point is, he has no motivation, no grand reason for doing what he's doing, and so I'm left just grasping at straws. That's why I'm able to think about this stuff. As a writer, I admit I do tend to overthink. I like to know how everything works. Like, I like to know all the names of the streets in my town, and it's not necessary to write a story. So I'm not saying that everyone needs to worry about it as much as me, but what I am saying is, if you want to prevent people from going down this rabbit hole of thinking, hey, what about this? Why doesn't this make sense? Why doesn't that work? Is just answer those basic questions. Answer those basic questions. Why are they doing this? Why is this happening? How does this work? These are simple questions. You can go into much detail as you like. I choose to go really far into it, but so long as you answer that first question, then suspension of disbelief takes over and it does the rest for you. But you need to do that little bit of effort. You need to tighten those strings just enough. Otherwise, we'll start seeing the strings connected to the puppets, we'll start seeing the mechanism, and we'll stop reading a story and start analyzing a writer who's not doing their job. So, for that reason, for everything that we've discussed, I have to say, when it comes to ranking this book, it's a D+. The only reason it's not in the minuses there, and even though it's a failing grade, the reason it's still a D+ is because, like I said, it's not a bad idea, the idea of exploring animals, especially from this idea of abuse, but I don't think that's necessarily what Betsy Haynes was aiming for. I think she was just going for this idea of, hey, being an animal is kind of creepy, especially if nobody listens to you. So for that reason, no, not good enough. But I want to say, even though I do hate this book, I think it's the one that I hate the most of Bone Chillers. So even though there's some other ones with some weird ideas and some I don't quite like, none of them get to the point where I think it's actually espousing some dangerous ideas of normalizing abuse, not even questioning the fact that parents are just buying pets when people ask for them, the fact that even an obedient school teacher is choking a pet and then knocking it unconscious. I don't think any other book goes that bad. You know, I like most of the other books, and in fact there's even some coming up that I really enjoy, so I look forward to getting to them. But I'm bringing up the rest of the books in this series because I want to say, when it comes to the whole zeitgeist, I have to say this doesn't do a great job of, even some of the other Chapter Spooks books I've read, of dealing with this idea of turning into an animal, especially turning into a dog. It's a very common trope, like I said, changing into something, and changing into a dog is the most common, and I don't think it was done very well. I will say, though, I do think it's done better than the barking ghost in Goosebumps, but I feel like I'm dwelling on Goosebumps too much. Like I said, I don't want to keep talking about that, so I'm not going to. What I will say is that Bone Chillers does have more to offer after now, and we'll get discussing that in time. But the two things I want to leave you with, from a writer's perspective. I did discuss a lot of writing things, but there's two main ones I want to reiterate here. The first is, make sure your reader can understand your main character. I don't need to like them. I don't need to love them. I don't even need to think they are right. I can think they're an idiot and wrong, but so long as I can understand why they are wrong or right or thinking the way they are, only then will I be willing to spend a lot of time with them. And I'll have to, because they're your main character. I have a whole book to read alongside them. And if I don't understand them, then I'll feel like that is a chore the whole way through. But secondly, and this one's a little bit out of left field, but I think it has to be, do your research. I feel like the reason why this book was so repetitive is because it was just repeating the same ideas over and over, because Betsy just didn't know enough about dogs. I think just doing the bare minimum of research, like, did you know what makes a dog hypoallergenic? Do you know why a dog pants when it's hot? Do you know what dogs see? Yes, they're colorblind, but they don't see in black and white. They actually tend to see in like blue and yellow, as I understand it. But this is my point. Just a little bit of research, a little bit more understanding can help you get the ideas that can make a story sing. But anyway, I am glad to see the back cover of this book, so I'll be looking forward to when we talk about the next book in this series, which is called Back to School. And hey, if you thought that was scary, just wait to see what I've got in store for you next time.